Welcome to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. I'm your host, Jamie Irvin. In this episode, we're going to talk about how things are really changing when it comes to parts identification. Later on in this episode, we're going to rerun a very popular episode from 2024 where we talked about parts identification. Now, let's talk a little bit about how technology is changing parts identification. Really, at the end of the day, when you think about the transition of older ones with a lot of experience leaving the industry because they're retiring, and you think about how there are less people right now who are available to take parts calls and have that kind of what they call tribal knowledge of how to identify parts, there's a real problem right now that technically should be easily solved by technology, and yet parts identification is still a big issue. If you run a repair shop and you can't get the correct parts, your customers are going to have more downtime, or if you're doing that on behalf of a fleet, they're going to have that downtime. This leads to frustration, but it also leads to a real economic impact on that trucking company, whoever it is, because downtime is so very expensive. So in this interview, we're going to talk to Joe Stewart, who is the general manager at Betts Truck Parts. And he really gives us some insights into some of the challenges of getting the correct parts to those trucks and getting those trucks back on the road. When I think about a recent study that we saw that was put out by McKay and Company, it's unsurprising that there's a real move towards e-commerce. Now, still, the vast majority of heavy-duty parts, according to this study and in our own experience at the Heavy Duty Consulting Corporation, is that people are still phoning in orders, right? They're talking to people on the parts counter. But year over year, we're seeing an increase in parts being purchased with e-commerce websites. And unsurprisingly, the fax, for example, has statistically gone to zero. Not that no orders are ordered by fax, but it's such a small number that on the macro data nationwide, it registers as 0%. So this shift has happened slowly over a couple decades. And really, I think, and what we see when we consult with our clients is we are seeing this continuous increase in the usage of e-commerce to buy heavy-duty parts. And this is definitely part of the solution. But one of the things we see at the Heavy Duty Consulting Corporation with our clients is even if you invest heavily in a great e-commerce site, right? You choose the right platform, the user experience is very good. If you don't have the data to back up what you're selling on that e-com site, it can cause significant problems. Now, when we talk about data, we want to talk about it in a couple different terms. There's PIES data, which that's an acronym, PIES, and that really is the standard for information related to the dimensions of the product, specifications of the product, but what the product actually is. Then there's what's called ACES data, ACES, which is a standard for year, make, model lookup information. Now, we all know in the aftermarket and heavy duty, year, make, model is very, very difficult. But additionally, if we don't have the right information about the part on the site and we don't help our customers to make the right buying decision, they can inadvertently order the wrong part. If they do that, it creates all kinds of problems. So we're going to take a quick break to hear from our awesome sponsors. When we get back, we're going to listen into our interview with Betts Truck Parts, where they really talk through these issues and how they've been dealing with it, what they do to try to ensure that their customers have a great experience and get the parts they need. And they talk a lot about the cost associated. And later on in the episode, we're also going to give you an example where something went really wrong because the wrong parts were installed and the legal advice that was given to this customer. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Are you deferring maintenance because of filter cost or availability? Or worse yet, are you trading down to no-name filters to try to save a few bucks? Either way, you're rolling the dice. The good news, there's a new premium filter option for fleets, Hanks Filtration. If you're responsible for a fleet, you won't believe how much using Hanks filters will save you. But you've got to go to heavydutypartsreport.com/Hanks to find out more. That's heavydutypartsreport.com/HENGST. Head there now. At Diesel Laptops, they go way beyond diagnostic tools. They are your complete shop efficiency partner. From diesel technician training to complete repair information, parts lookup tools, and robust technical support, they are there to support you every step of the way. Learn more and download your free starter pack today by visiting diesellaptops.com. That's diesellaptops.com. HDA Truck Pride is the heart of the independent parts and service channel. They have 750 parts stores and 450 service centers conveniently located across the US and Canada. Visit heavydutypartsreport.com/HDA Truck Pride today to find a location near you. Again, that's heavydutypartsreport.com/HDA Truck Pride, and let the heart of the independent service channel take care of your commercial equipment. We're back from the break. Before the break, we were talking about how important it is to get the right information in, especially if you're using an e-commerce website, how you have to be able to give our customers the right information so that they are very confident that they are buying the right part. So listening to my interview with Betts Truck Parts. Now, this interview was originally aired back in November of 2023. It was episode 291. This is a re-airing of that interview. It's one of our most popular interviews of the last 12 months. And since we are all on holidays at the Heavy Duty Parts Report this week, I wanted to make sure that we had an interview for you to listen to. So I hope you enjoy it. Listen in. Parts identification is a challenge if you are on the independent service channel side of the business. If you work in the OEM and the dealership environment, as long as you've got a VIN, parts identification is pretty straightforward. But if you work on the dealer side, or if you're on the aftermarket side and you step outside of that where you're all makes, it's a completely different world. Today, we're going to talk about the challenges associated with parts identification, the costs associated when we get it wrong, and proactive steps we can take that will improve the way that we identify parts and make sure that our customers are getting the right part the first time. To help me with this, I'm very excited to have Joe Stewart, the general manager of Betts Truck Parts and Service, with me. Now, Joe has been a general manager in the heavy-duty truck transportation industry for over 20 years. He has always been interested in understanding how things work and has dedicated his career to doing just that in all aspects, from parts and service to people and process. Joe, welcome to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to engage.
All right. Well, let's talk about parts identification. If you're on the independent side of the business, it is a challenge. You and I look like we're kind of coming from roughly the same age group. So let's talk a little bit about the way things were when we were first entering the business and learning the business. Joe, when you first got into the business, what was the way that people went about identifying parts, especially on that aftermarket side of the business?
Oh, man. Well, we have the table full of catalogs. Hopefully, we had a customer who was competent enough or had the technical ability to tear down whatever project they were working on, or at least be able to limp their product or their vehicle in so that we could climb underneath it and identify whatever part they were, was broken and needed to be replaced.
So let me ask you something. Were you a fan of the catalogs on a bookcase, or did you have those big metal bins with the big rings that you could put all the catalogs together kind of on your desktop?
I got lost in that because typically I like to see the spine of it.
Okay, so you were a bookcase guy.
Totally, yeah. So I could, and then I could kind of order them by alphabetical or however your brain works, man. I mean,
so I had it the other way. I used the big metal contraption that you put all your catalogs in, and I had just tabs, and I had it all laid out, not in alphabetical, but I had it laid out by product type. So I had like air systems, electrical, suspension, wheel end, stuff like that. So okay, so there's some differences, but that's the way it was done, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the way your brain works, right? And we also had what's a microfiche and all kinds of other sources of technical breakdowns and data. Aside from being able to, a lot of these guys that we have in the aftermarket are able to take a phone call and ask, what are you working on? And, in these trucks, they're all 100% custom built, right? It's not like an automotive industry where, everything kind of has the same stuff in it. You could have different transmissions or gear sets or, braking systems and all kinds of stuff on these vehicles. And so it's interesting to see and hear the questions that have to be asked and answered to narrow down exactly what it is we're looking for.
That's a good point, Joe. What I remember distinctly about, especially the way I was trained, is that you had to ask the right questions, right? Like the first question, is this on a truck or is this on a trailer? But you had to know intuitively how to ask those correct questions, because if you didn't, you could easily be going down the wrong road.
Not only that, but you could be frustrating your customer. On the automotive side, going into a parts shop and asking for a set of wiper blades, and then having the counter person ask you the year, make, and model of your vehicle and whether or not it was an automatic or a manual, and whether or not it was 4-wheel drive or 2-wheel drive for a set of wiper blades. You're like, come on, man. Like, that's the type of thing that, in our industry, your reputation is on the line, and your ability to hold your own and have that dialogue with your customers in a way that's productive and makes them want to come back, on top of, like we kind of alluded to earlier, finding the right part the first time. And, the way that you handle those situations is imperative, especially in the aftermarket. It's a little bit more scrappy. It's harder to get that business.
It is. I remember when they first started showing up, and they would have catalogs like on a disc, like a CD-ROM that you could put in your computer. But, those things were outdated, just like the printed catalogs. Like you were just always anxious for the newest catalog information possible. I think you also had to learn how to read a catalog, which I think was a good thing. It taught you kind of how to think through identifying the part. And I think that's something we lost when everything went online. When things did move to online, one of the things that I noticed right away is the reliability of that information really deteriorated rather quickly. Like if I had a Bendix catalog, even if it was an older one, I was pretty sure that when I got it figured out, I had the right part. But a Google search doesn't necessarily point you in the right direction.
No, you have to be really careful, right? So some of the stuff that you run into is, suggested or something along those lines. And it very quickly, you can think that you're looking at the part that you need, and you've taken a left-hand turn somewhere and ended up in some other aspect of the vehicle, or, for a product that's related, but not necessarily the part that you're looking for as well.
Yeah. And one of the things, like I did a lot in air systems. So, if you have these valves and they've got different crack pressures, right? They look identical. Like they visually, they look the same number of ports. They're all 3/8 on the bottom, or they're all 1/2 inch. They have the same number of inlet and outlet. Like it's all identical, but there's a different crack pressure, and there's no way to visually know that. So if you don't have the right set of data in front of you, don't have the information in front of you that's accurate from the manufacturer, you could easily give someone the wrong part. And that's just one example. I mean, you get into electronics, it's like that, probably exponentially worse than on the air side. Now, you've always worked on the service side as well as parts, whereas for me, I've pretty much predominantly just been in parts. How has it been on the service side? Like just thinking back to those years past, what unique challenges were there if you also had a service shop?
I would say that, preparing for a job before it came in, and then finding out the stuff that you prepared with is wrong because of a conversation with a customer maybe went the wrong way between the service manager and the customer, or, there was just a slight misunderstanding on one thing or another on exactly what the root cause of the failure or the issue was prior to the truck showing up for its appointment. And then showing up and being almost, afraid is probably the wrong word, but very hesitant to take it apart without having what's needed to replace what needs to be replaced in stock. And so, then doing the hurry up and rush and run around, you're actually shopping your competitors for parts that you need to fix a truck that's in your shop. So it's a little bit humbling on that front, as well as, just wanting to make sure that the customer has the best experience possible in your shop and wants to come back, right? And so, hustling through that is when the truck shows up, it's like kind of hunting that whale or that elephant or whatever. And then, once you get it, it's like now the work starts, right? Now I got to figure out how to make this happen in a way that's efficient and it makes everybody happy.
Yeah, and now I've seen, you kind of move into the more recent times, and we've kind of seen an explosion of people trying to solve this parts identification issue from a technology perspective. And, we've seen different apps roll out, different software platforms, integrations with telematics, like all kinds of things. And it's almost at this point like there's a bit of overload there. But there still seems to be a core issue, which is it's very difficult to narrow down all the variations. So, even if you were to be able to get the data from the OEM, let's say you got the Bendix data from Bendix and it was accurate, that doesn't necessarily always correlate to the Kenworth truck sitting in front of you versus the Freightliner and the variation in 2016 on one option or another, right? So parts identification, despite all of the technological advances, still seems to be a problem.
Well, there's a whole nother layer that you didn't mention, right? And that is how many iterations of this truck have since it was produced to where it is right now, right? Was it used as a roll-off and now it's a tractor and then it was a dump truck? How many lives has this truck lived? And what did they do? The ownership throughout. What have they done and to change the suspension to for the requirements for that particular application and all those types of things. And so it's definitely complex. I mean, you have to almost have the vehicle or the part in front of you to make sure that you're giving them the right thing the first time, every time.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And when I was selling in Northern Alberta, we were very, very heavy oil and gas. But in 2016, the oil prices, kind of the commodity prices collapsed here in Canada. And it was real tough times for about 2 years there. And so we had all kinds of oil fleets that were in oil and gas, and they were re-rigging their trucks to go logging. And then 3 years later, right, like the cycle on logs goes and oil and gas comes back. So then they rig again, right? And you're absolutely right. Every time they rig that truck for a specific vocation. And that's predominantly driven by the fact that these are work vehicles. These are assets that have to be out in the field making money. Otherwise, why do you even have them, right? So no, that's definitely something that adds to the complexity of it.
It's tricky, especially in the aftermarket when you don't know what that truck has on it because of its age. I mean, especially in California, it's a little bit easier, right? Because typically the year range of the trucks has to be pretty tight in order to fit carb standards and all that. And we don't have to get into that today, but we're lucky enough to operate also in Oregon and Arizona. So we get a lot of that flavor in those states where, those trucks have gone through different iterations of, different lives, that those trucks have lived. And it definitely makes it fun, right? And I think the customers gain a lot of respect for a counter person or a service manager, whoever it is that's trying to help them identify something that didn't necessarily come on that truck when it was built. And it wouldn't matter if you had a VIN number or not, because, it's going to take an expert to visual, get the visual identification and then do some digging to make sure that you get the right thing.
Yeah. And also I think of how vehicles have changed so much over the last 25 years. Like when I entered into the business, what was being produced, there was long, consistent runs. So you would have the same kind of setup suspension wise and engine platform and everything on a specific make and model. And maybe that run would last for several years. And so it was almost identical parts, as long as it was within that age range, you were pretty sure that the part you were looking for, and it was all mechanical, so there's a lot less to remember. Then all of a sudden you have so much more electronics. Now we have all of these ECMs that are running different things. You've got all these fault codes. You've got all this complexity to the technology, and that's really changed the game on parts identification as well.
I agree. We've been in an aftermarket, and we don't necessarily do in my business. It's mostly suspension and wheel end type work that we're in right now. And I got to tell you, we're pushing our fleet, or our technicians and our service managers to plug into every truck that comes in the shop, just like a dealership does. Pull codes prior to and after appointment, and just even on the ABS and traction control systems, just to show that we're paying attention to everything that comes through the door and trying to, show the customer everything that's going on with their truck while it's in our care.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the impact all of this has on, everybody in the supply chain. So if you don't get the right part, if you misidentify the part, you send it out to the customer directly, or you try to install it on their vehicle and you find out, oh, it's the wrong part. What does that do for that end user customer? What's the cost associated with that?
Well, I mean, we use uptime in our industry every day, right? Like it's the most important thing in the industry is making sure that these assets are rolling and making sure that we're delivering all the products and services around the nation or around the world that are required for everyday life, right? And so, doing everything we can to make sure that that stuff is constantly moving. I would just say that, there are a lot of cases where, we're up against a situation, and I mentioned it earlier about having to go to some of your competition to try and pick up a part to hustle and get this truck back on the road because, these customers, our customers have customers and their customers have customers, and it creates a whole chain of disappointment and frustration and delay and pricing changes because of it, and it causes all kinds of logistical nightmares for most times. I would say we don't really fully understand the end impact at the location that you're trying to service the customer at.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think about let's say a fleet, right? And they've got a truck and it misses a deadline that could jeopardize the relationship with their customer that's using them and their service. You think of an owner operator, right? Their families are reliant on this truck and their mom or dad to work and make money. So that's food on the table. I tell this story quite a lot, but I remember I'll never forget the one guys whose wife called me and said, if you hadn't helped me with that transmission problem, I don't know what we would have done for groceries next week. And it was just such a moving moment for me because it made me realize how important it is to get this right. The cost isn't just for the end user customer though, too, right? The distributor and the supplier all obviously are impacted when the wrong part is shipped. So walk us through a little bit of what that feels like from your perspective. If the supplier sends you the wrong part, what does that do to your business?
Yeah, we're all positioning ourselves for, realistic and sustainable profitability, right? And I think that when these types of things happens, it puts all that in jeopardy. As a supplier to my customer, I'm battling to keep the price in line. And even though maybe I made the mistake or maybe the supplier made the mistake and shipped me the wrong part, regardless of where that mistake lies, I'm kind of trying to position myself to not lose on it, right? And my customers positioning themselves to not lose on it. And same with the supplier and beyond. And so that's where relationships come in, really. And I think that we, need to make sure that we're responsible, with one another and how we navigate those things respectfully and just try to, work it out. I mean, we've done crazy things, man. We've put trucks on airplane seats and in Uber cars and, all kinds of different methods to try and make things happen for a customer. Made hotshot runs to meet up with another location that we own, because it's the only one in the West Coast or something, crazy where we're, trying to each drive 4 hours to meet in the middle and bounce back out. It's hectic. And for us to do all of that and have the customer still miss a deadline, man, I mean, it's a tough market. It's a tough industry.
Yeah, and you're right. You mentioned the importance of relationships and that relationship with your customer. They don't expect perfection, but when something goes wrong, they want to see you take action. I remember times where, there was a lot of I'll get you the part and we'll figure it out after. It's because the downtime was going to be far more than any freight cost or any delivery charge or anything. So just get the customer the part, whatever you have to do, and then figure it out on the back end. And I think that from the distributor's perspective, profit is not easy to come by. It's not like we're just making double or triple digit profit on every sale. The reality is sometimes margins are slim, and then something not showing up on time or having to go to those extra lengths, we're losing money, and that's a real cost to the distributor. And sometimes they have to just eat that. And it's not even their fault, right? I can't tell you how many times I had to just eat something because the supplier missed the shipping deadline. And now it's it doesn't matter because my customer needs to be taken care of. So I'm going to get the job done and we'll figure it out on the back end. So yeah, there's a real cost there. And I think from the supplier too, if they don't execute well over a period of time, that pushes the distributor to reconsider who they buy the product from. And so I think up and down the supply chain, the stakes are really high, and all for identifying the part correctly.
Well, and when we're selling to, you call it retail or business to business, either way, right? We're selling to a customer that sometimes pays cash or sometimes has net terms. And I think that when we're trying to sell at a reasonable market price, You have to buy in volume to do that. And when these one-offs come at you, they're not cheap. They're not cheap, and it causes potential strain on relationships in both directions.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what is Betts doing to invest in the technology you're using, training? Like what steps is your company taking to make sure that all of their parts professionals have the best tools and are trained well so that they are able to identify the parts the customers need?
We're using Motor and some of the other cataloging opportunities. A lot of the vendors these days have great cross-reference guides built into their websites. We use those. We've also engaged with an online store builder for our industry who has done a great job of helping us with our online store, providing cross-reference information and things like that. That we can use to help customers out when, maybe we don't have X brand, but we have Y, and can help them through those types of methods. And really, it's just with the generational changes that we've seen and the decrease in the workforce volume in our industry, we don't have that knowledge that we used to have. The guy that could, or a gal that could answer the phone and give you the part number off the top of their head without looking at the catalog no longer, they're dwindling, right? They're harder and harder to come by. And so we're having to rely more and more on technology and online catalogs and sourcing methods that are different than they used to be, because the workforce simply doesn't have the experience that they used to have, the depth of experience, right? And so we're trying to cover up the lack of experience with technology, and it's in some cases successful and helps expedite certain things, but it definitely comes with its own set of challenges because you've got to make sure that they're paying attention to the details. I mean, you kind of mentioned earlier, you do a Google search or something for a part, and it could send you to a related part or something that's very, very similar, looks exactly the same, and maybe even the background image is the same. So you got to read the fine print that says, image used, not necessarily the, whatever that verbiage is or the terminology they use. You have to really pay attention to what you're doing because, again, looping back into the rest of the conversation that we've had so far, it's just, you can find yourself offering the wrong part very quickly, very easily.
Yeah, and the training that is required now, like I think back to when I was first being trained, right? I remember I went and I said, "Hey, what is this?" And it was actually a MV3 valve. And the person who was my mentor who was training me, he said, "I can tell you the part number, or I can show you how to figure out what that part is." Right? And he goes, "It's your choice." And it was a test. It was a test to see. I was like an 18-year-old kid, right? It's like, well, what kind of an employee do we have here? And I said,
"Are you going to ask me every time, or am I going to teach you?"
Yeah, exactly. So I said, "Show me how to look it up." Right. And he goes, "Right answer, correct answer." So once I learned how to identify that, suddenly, on those particular group of air valves, I was asking him a lot less questions, right? That same philosophy still stands today. It's just what we use is different, right? So it's like, let me show you how to go to this website. Let me show you how to use this supplier's tool. Let me show you how to use this technology we've invested in. Let me show you how to figure it out for yourself so that you can be independent moving forward. But I still feel for the young people in the industry because the complexity of the equipment is so much greater than it was 25 years ago. So their learning curve is much more, let's say it's a steeper learning curve maybe than what we experienced. We just had to learn how to read catalogs and kind of memorize the most common parts. For them, it's a different world.
Definitely, and I think you kind of brought it up there, leveraging the vendors that make these parts to help with that training as well, and using their websites and coming in and showing, there's a lot of times our vendors will come in and ask, how's it going? Do you have everything you need? And they get the yeah, right? But a good vendor rep will start asking tougher questions like, well, do you know how to look this up? Or have you logged into our website? And have you used this cross-reference tool, or have you had to search for this or that type of part, and really get over someone's shoulder and be involved in helping them realize that they have a tool that, that they could learn from, rather than kind of having that, "Oh no, I got it. I'll figure it out" mentality. So, leaning on those vendor partners, supplier partners, is really important and is another great aspect to the training portfolio or options.
I agree with you completely. Tell me a story about a Betts customer who, really relied on Betts to get the right part, the right time, and how did it all turn out? So how does everything you guys do come together? Tell us one of those stories.
Yeah, well, like I mentioned earlier, we've gone out of our way and taken great lengths to make something happen for a customer at our own expense, just to make sure that they had a good experience. In a situation where somebody made a phone call, had to drive here, had to drive actually to this location here in Portland from Tri-Cities in Washington. It's a several hour trek, right? And made their way down and got here, and what we had wasn't what they needed. And while they were here, we had to make the phone calls. They observed our counter staff hustling to try and source the part that they did need. And then, the branch manager drove over across town to pick one up and bring it over and take care of them. And it's situations like that. I think that, people in our industry, they're very familiar with that type of service that you have to provide in order to keep that customer, to have any chance at having somewhat of a decent experience for the customer in that type of situation. Other situations where a customer, like I said earlier, where we're prepping for a service job, hopefully ahead of time. So when the truck shows up, we have what's needed. We can disassemble and reassemble in a much, quicker fashion, but we prepped with the wrong order or the wrong parts. Maybe having used the VIN number and finding out, another thing that we mentioned earlier is, these trucks go through, in some cases, several iterations of use. And so it doesn't have what it did have when it was made. And we made the mistake of trying to rely on the VIN number and finding out when it shows up that we've got the wrong stuff, and having to go again, either, starting close and working your way out in geographic distance from your pinpoint location to try and find that part, hustle out and get it and bring it back to the shop so that we can keep going and get the customer out with the right stuff.
One thing I know is when you do it right, people do appreciate it. But when something goes wrong and then you hustle and you fix it, oftentimes they never forget that hustle, right? So that is part of the game. It's part of what's necessary to be successful. You've been listening to the Heavy Duty Parts Report. My name is Jamie Irvin, and it's been my pleasure to talk to Joe Stewart, General Manager of Betts Truck Parts and Service. If you'd like to learn more about Betts Truck Part and Service, go to bettstruckparts.com. Links are in the show notes. Well, I really hope you enjoyed my interview with Betts Truck Parts. I thought there was so many good points that were made about what it takes to get the right parts to the customer the first time. It's now time for our segment, That's Not Heavy Duty. In this edition of That's Not Heavy Duty, I want to continue the conversation about not getting the right parts to the customer and installing the wrong part, and how devastating of an impact that can have on a customer. So we went to a legal website and we looked up a case study of what happens when the wrong part is sold and installed on a vehicle. Now, here's the background. This vehicle was taken to a Cummins engine repair shop. So it's probably just a Cummins approved, independently owned repair shop. And it was in Mobile, Alabama. Now, what happened is the truck was fixed. And when they were driving away from the shop, it broke down again. The truck was towed back to that shop and has been in repair ever since. So now the truck has been down for a total of 2 months. Now, here's what the customer is saying. The manager of this repair facility told them that it was the fault of the mechanic because they installed an incorrect part. The part was the wrong size. They installed it, and that's what caused the breakdown. So at the root of this problem, this is a parts identification issue, right? The wrong part was installed on the vehicle. So the customer goes on to say, now it's been 3 weeks beyond a reasonable repair time, and they have lost $8,000 in income. Now, the question that this customer is asking for legal advice, this is the question. We're trying to find out if there's a way to get compensated for downtime since this was all caused by the repair facility. Here's the response from this legal website. They say, and I quote, if the repair shop was negligent in installing the improper part, then legally you can sue them for their negligence, which can include lost income for use of the vehicle if you have no other vehicles that you can use as a substitute during this time. Unfortunately, it is likely the company will deny your claim, so that means you would have to file a suit and you would need to get a witness to testify that it was indeed because of the wrong part that this damage occurred to your vehicle. This whole situation can be avoided by identifying the correct part. And really, at the end of the day, we all know that things go wrong from time to time. But as heavy-duty parts professionals, it is really our responsibility to ensure that the mechanics who are installing parts get the right part the first time, right? So that this whole situation can be avoided. Parts identification is such a critical foundational piece of the repair process, and we've got to get it right. Yes, as time goes on, technology will become more and more part of that process. But as we've discussed, it can still be part of the problem, part of the failure, if the data isn't correct. So again, if you are trying to digitize parts identification, if you're trying to use e-commerce to distribute parts, you've got to make sure that that data is correct so that people can make a good buying decision. And as parts professionals, we have to continue to be diligent and hone our skills and learn how to identify the right parts, how to ask the right questions to make sure that repair technicians get exactly what they need. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. As we've mentioned over the last couple episodes, the Heavy Duty Parts Report team has been on vacation. That's why we're re-airing a couple of our most popular episodes. I hope you enjoyed them. And if you haven't already, because next week we've got a brand new interview and we are back from vacation and we are going to be bringing you a lot of excellent information and interviews coming up. So if you haven't already, head over to heavydutypartsreport.com, sign up to our weekly email. You only get one email a week, no spam, no marketing, just one email a week that says, hey, this is the new content that's out so you never miss out. If you listen on the podcast player of your choice, if you can, we'd really appreciate for you to follow us, but also to give us a 5-star rating and review if it gives you that option. We've heard that that helps with reach and we really could use the support. Thank you for that. Also, if you like the video version, go over to our YouTube channel, hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification so you never miss out. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Heavy Duty Parts Report. And as always, I want to encourage you to be heavy duty. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to subscribe to the Heavy Duty Parts Report YouTube channel and click here to watch another great episode.